Afternoon in Washington, D.C. and on the East Coast. Welcome to the Arctic Indigenous Scholars Seminar. My name is Sarah Bowden, and on behalf of ARCIS, IARPIC, and USGCRP, I thank you for joining us today. Today's seminar will feature Helen Aderman from the Bristol Bay Native Association. So before we would begin, I'd like to thank the U.S. Global Change Research Program for providing our venue for today's in-person seminar, the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee for hosting the webinar, and the National Science Foundation Office of Polar Programs for their financial support to ARCIS and the Arctic Indigenous Scholars Program. Next slide. Empowering Arctic Indigenous Scholars and Making Connections is a program led by the Arctic Research Consortium of the U.S. and the Inuit Circumpolar Council, Alaska, and supported by the National Science Foundation's Division of Arctic Science to create a space for Indigenous scholars to educate and inform policy and decision makers engaged in Arctic issues from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Now, I would like to welcome today's presenter, Helen Aderman. Helen is a Yupik Eskimo born in Togiak, Alaska. She is Bristol Bay Native Association's Marine Mammal Manager based in Dillingham and the Executive Director of the Kayasik. Thank you, Helen. Walrus Commission and Bristol Bay Mammal Council. Bristol Bay Marine Mammal Council, thank you. She holds a BA in Rural Development from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Helen is working to address impacts on marine mammal habitat use areas and to ensure future Alaska Native generations will have continued access to their traditional marine foods for harvest. Today, she will be discussing the Bristol Bay marine ecosystem and subsistence resource needs. Please join me in welcoming Helen Aderman.
Oyana means thank you for letting me be here. And I not used to being in the capital city. I work with the Alaska Native marine mammal tribal groups, and I work for the Bristol Bay Native Association. You see the picture right here. This is a Pacific walrus. In my Yupik Eskimo language, it's Azvuk. Next slide, please. So the Bristol Bay Native Association, we serve 31 tribes from Togiak, that's the west side. And Dillingham is where I work. You could see it right there. And we go all the way down to the northern Alaska Peninsula, which goes all the way down to Port Hayden. And we have sub-regions because it is so diverse. In the southern Alaska Peninsula, we go all the way down to Ivanhoe Bay. Next slide, please. So in the Alaska, when you look on the map, on the handle, on the panhandle, Bristol Bay Native Association, we're located in Southwest Alaska, which is at the top of the peninsula, and we were incorporated in 1973. That's the year I graduated from high school. And we serve 31 federally recognized tribes. Next slide, please. And we have a mission statement for the 31 federally recognized tribes nominated, the board nominated by the full board. Their mission statement is to maintain and they want to promote their strong regional organization supported by the tribes of Bristol Bay, to serve as a unified voice, to provide social, economic, cultural, education opportunities and initiatives for the benefit of the tribes we serve and the Native people of Bristol Bay. Next slide, please. So my topic is because I work for the Kayasik Walrus Commission, and we've been working through the Oak Foundation grants on a multi-species conservation plan. So both the Kayasik Walrus Commission and the Bristol Bay Marine Mammal Council, after we had the the tribal regional communities of Chignik Lagoon, Port Haydn, and Togiak. They developed their tribal multi-species conservation plans, and through the Oak Foundation funding, and we expanded. It ended up being a 5-year project, so we expanded it with the BIA climate resilience project. So this is the result of the Tribal Advisory Council from Chignik Lagoon, Port Haydn, and Togiak, and both the joint board of the Bristol Bay Marine Mammal Council and the Wallace Commission. We came up with a vision statement. We all know that in the global environment, a lot of the people are called indigenous, no matter what nationality they are. So that indigenous people is a standard accepted, nationally accepted word. So in the vision that they came up with is indigenous people live harmoniously within our ecosystem as our ancestors have done since time immemorial. And the mission statement that both the Wallace Commission and the Marine Mammal Council is we want to protect our cultural ways through the tribal stewardship of resources and the traditionally utilized land and waters, through the application of integrated traditional research utilizing traditional ecological knowledge known as TEC, and appropriate Western science methodologies to ensure accessibility and full utilization for future generations. So when we were having our Tribal Regional Advisory Council meetings, the tribes wanted to ensure that they have access to both historic and present marine mammal habitat areas where they have hunted for future generations. Next slide, please. In the Yupik Eskimo language, I was taught. My late parents were born in, my late dad was born in 1900, and my late mom was born in 1914. And they teach us lots of old-time ways. So the accepted old-time way that they taught us is called Bijireak. Bijireak is the traditional way of life, and that's what the tribes prefer over subsistence. When they say traditional way of life, that means that we are living our way of life. It encompasses everything. So the indigenous Alaska Native Yupik people of Bristol Bay regions, we have the Yupik Eskimos, and the Dena'ina eat Athabascan Indians there in the Iliamna region. And then we also have the Aleuts. The Aleuts do have 2 different dialects. It's Sukpiak and Ungangak. It's just like, there's many dialects. You say Yupik Eskimo. But where I'm from, in the Nushagak area, my late mom used to say the dialects start changing from, Good News Bay on up. That's past Cape Newnham up north. So we are, and we have our unique ways of how we live our lives, and the skills mostly the skills of hunting and fishing, they were taught by the men. And as ladies, we were taught to be the, processors of the stuff that the hunters brought home. Like we'd process for example, seal, like for, sometimes they'd make dried meat, and sometimes we'd also process the blubber to make it to render the fat to seal oil. And the gathering has lots of components. The gathering could be, you gather traditional medicine plants. You also gather wild edible plants, which is berries or wild edible greens. And the survival, and we're taught to respect our environment. And like I mentioned, how to preserve our foods for our families and communities. So since time immemorial, our traditional ways of life have been passed orally. What they call them is alakotaks, the traditional customs that have been passed down orally. from one generation to the next. And the old timers always know who's going to carry on the tradition. They could see a person who's going to specialize and carry on the tradition. I was taught medicinal plants. And then there's other ones that are, they teach them when they're little, maybe 3 years on up to learn to hunt, learn everything out there by looking. That's how you learn and participating. I learned to cut fish maybe when I was 4 years old. I still got the scar right there. And those old timers, they complimented you. You might have cut fish sloppy, split it sloppy. You cut it like in fillet fish. You cut it sloppy, but they compliment you. They always complimented you. They never say that don't look good, So that's what make you feel like you're part of the family and stuff like that. And back in the day too, they also had extended family, So if there's people that had no parents, they adopted the families to, and then so a lot of my late parents adopted when the flu came. They included maybe Luktukayak family and the Kupchayak family. So a lot of those old timers, younger generations that were in their 70s and 80s used to call my late parents their parents. Yeah, that's the way it's always been, even if we have changes that are happening now. Next slide. So I thought long and hard about what I was going to do, because I really enjoy working with our people. I really do. Because when I first come on, all we had was meetings, nothing. So, and then I was sitting on those different boards, and I sat for 13 years at the North Pacific Research Board, and they had advisory panel. They had all this fancy terminology. So I said, you guys start talking about the research in a layman's language that everybody's going to understand. So this the concept is, to make everybody understand, even the hunters understand what we're talking about, so that they will not be excluded, but included in this type of research. So we use the best of, that's what I mean when we use the best of traditional knowledge. If we do something in a community, the experts are there, the elders, the experienced hunters, and the younger ones in learning. So my title is Umyuak Sakluta. That means we all come together to become one mind and to become stronger. So impacts on marine mammal habitat use areas. We want to ensure the future of subsistence resource use areas. And the best approach that we take is the multi-species habitats in Bristol Bay. That there's many, many diverse multi-species. As you can see, the Gulf of Alaska side is, the Prince William Sound side. They got different species than they're deep water fishing there, and in the northern peninsula side, we got shallow, murky water. It's environment's different. In the Liamna Lake, they got freshwater harbor seals, which is one of the second unique freshwater harbor seals. They got one in Kirill, Russia side. They all got their unique, distinct things that are important in the we call them the subregions in BBNA. So our region is the nursery habitat for many multi-species, which is in the land, the waters. It includes the marine and land animals. It includes migratory birds and fish. Our traditional stewardship responsibilities, this have been passed on to us since time immemorial, that, we are the caretakers of the land. So Our tribal responsibilities and practices, they center on ensuring the health of the food chain, supporting human beings, and that of other multi-species. So today, more than in times past, our traditional marine ecosystem resources, we need protection from environmental, commercial, and human development impacts. There's many changes that have been observed since my late parents' time to now. Next slide, please. So, in order to for all of us to speak the same language, including our agency partners and the institution partners, we are committed to intertribal collaboration, and we want to work together to ensure that user group prioritization is recognized in accordance to tribal, federal, and state management priority succession, environment, subsistence, although we like to say our traditional way of life, and commercial industry in conjunction with co-management agreements. We are committed to ensuring recognition and consideration of all available information without disregard or just serve one user group needs exclusively. We don't like to be excluded, we like to be included in participating in try to come to some type of a harmonious consensus to resolve issues. So thus eliminating the economic-driven conservation resource management model. Next slide, please. This is an old picture, probably taken in the 50s. It's that's used to be before they had electricity. This was the what we call an elevated fish cache. Before they had refrigeration and stuff, they had to store fish up in the fish cache. They had like dry fish. They'd have dried meat, and when I was growing up, they had dried. We preserved berries too when they start freezing, and we had cellars too. So, and bears never bothered. We never locked nothing back then. I'm sorry, am I going out of line?
No.
But yeah, that's how we grew up, and we had dog teams, so we had 2 racks going. First, we did the family stuff, then we did the dog team ones. And back then we also preserved our fish and meat by salting them with rock salt. But mostly the fish we call salunaks. And we also preserved the herring eggs. We dried them like sun-dried raisins. Mm-hmm. Then you put them in the water, they plump right up again. So, those are the different preservation methods that I was taught growing up, but now we got more modern preservation methods. Please, next slide. So, the Alaska Native people, we have local traditional knowledge, experience, because they have the knowledge of where they live. They know everything that's out there where they live. They always see the changes happening in their communities, whether it be freshwater tributaries or in the marine coastal environment. And the old timers, they taught when they teach the young hunters, back then they had a traditional advisor, elder advisor, who used to go to the hunt group. They'd abide by tradition, teach them to make sure that they abided by the traditional knowledge, so that so they could survive out there, because there was always constantly changing land, water, and environmental surroundings. Like, they taught them many things about the different ice conditions. They taught them about the weather patterns. But, things aren't like they used to be, because when I was working for the Wallace Commission, our regulated hunt was Round Island. And this one traditional advisor used to tell me, when there's a little hat on top of the island and the clouds are tight, the winds are gonna blow really hard. They taught them stuff like that. They used to forecast the weather by looking at the clouds. That's how my older brothers were taught. But now with all the stuff changing, it might look like that. The next day it might be 50, 60 mile an hour winds, it's not like it used to be. That's just an example. Julia put Alach las goed klam joy, auluk las klukut. Down McQuangu the mani nuna put machput, Damasquita nunami, auluk sakau. That was one of the traditional laws, or alach kotaks, which is translated to our ancestors used to tell us, the one who is our creator takes care of us. Because of this, we are here on our earth, land, waters. We all need to be caretakers and be stewards of everything in our lands and waters. Why do we do our traditional native subsistence fishing, hunting, gathering? Because our native ancestors taught us. And I mentioned earlier through our parents, grandparents. If you don't have grandparents, sometime other old elders adopted you to kind of like in this day and age, they call a mentor. So aunts, uncles who lived their way of life. So when my late parents died in the 80s, my late parents raised 9 children. I had 5 older brothers, 2 younger brothers, and my older sister Anna, but they were long gone. And it was the custom for the woman to carry on the traditional activities. So when my late mom passed away in 1993, I became the matriarch to carry on the traditions. So every year I take 4 weeks off to do my subsistence fishing activities. If I have no leave, I'm going to do it. I don't care. It's in my blood. I got to do it. It's like I got to go pick berries, and my late auntie, they got arthritis when they get old, when they're alive. But back then, berry picking time, they take those 5-gallon buckets, old Blazo can buckets. They climb mountains to pick blackberries. They'd have no more arthritis because they wanted to pick their berries. That's why we do our stuff. It's a spiritual, and healing. It kind of like rejuvenate you, like when you go on vacation someplace to rejuvenate you. That's what it is. It's something in you that you can't really say. It is kind of like when you go to church, back then you respected when you go to church, it's sacred. That's how my late dad teaches like that about the land, to take care of it. And it's priceless. And, even if we appear poor to the eyes of the Western world, we're rich in our resources that our Creator provided us. Next slide. So some examples that we worked with the Bering Sea Integrated Ecosystem Research Project interviews. They had what they called community subsistence projects. So in the Bristol Bay area, there was a Togiak subsistence area. So when they interviewed experienced old timers in Togiak, they came up with the habitat and subsistence resource use areas. So you see on the map where Togiak is in Dillingham. Dillingham and Togiak, 75 miles away by boat and by air. So you could see where the walrus used to migrate on the shoreline. The old timers say the animals have a spring and fall migration. So these were the historical migration routes of the Pacific walrus when they come down in April. And they used to go back up north, the male walrus, when it starts getting cold, maybe October, they go up north. And they have lots of knowledge of what's shallow, what's deep, where the currents are. and where the animals, where the traditional hunting and haul-out sites are in these areas. And you could see Round Island is that you could go for Kayasik. That was one of our traditional prime hunting sites, as well as when they didn't see walrus there, our ancestors went to Hagmaster Island, and my late dad and them were born in the old Togiak, so they'd all go back kayaks to go hunt. And then when they stopped having kayaks in the 30s, they started having sailboats. They'd go with sailboats to hunt because one of our Walrus Commission chairmen, when he was a chairman, Frankie Gusak from Togiak, mentioned that he remember, going with the old timers when they're orphaned, like Frank was orphaned, his uncles raised him. One of them was my late uncle, Pebble. So, their traditional fall hunt was at Round Island after the flies left. And in 1960, they didn't know that it became a state Walrus Island state game sanctuary. So they did their traditional hunting like usual. My late dad, my late Uncle James Pavian, and Grandpa Uncle Pabla Janakia, and Jack Gasak, all those old timers. So they went and did their traditional hunt when they were hunting. The state troopers come and arrest them. They put them in chains. We had no computers then. In 1960. Only communication was those rotary phones or CBs. My uncle was so mad he tore the chain, broke the chain. But anyway, they worked really hard in BBNA and some of the old timers that passed on in Togiak to restore the traditional hunt. It took them 30 years to start a regulated hunt with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game regulatory process, game regulatory process. So the first traditional hunt at Kayasik was restored in 1995. So we work with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Wildlife Conservation Division. We're co-managers of the, we're one of the first ever, we received direct co-management funding from the Fish and Wildlife, and the walrus at Round Island is co-managed by the Eskimo Walrus Commission, the Kayasik Walrus Commission, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Marine Mammal Management Division, and the State of Alaska Department of Fish and Game Wildlife Conservation Division. So the system that they adopted is what they call, we have hunt captains in each of the 9 walrus hunting communities. The bigger communities have more hunt captains, and they have to get hunt permits before they go hunt. The walrus hunts open October 1 to September 20th to October 1 every year. But anyway, you could keep moving.
Next slide. Next slide.
So we have very, very, very many issues, and these are just little teeny ones right here. Our number one concern that is affecting people right now, as you all know, is the proposed Pebble mine. And one of our main livelihoods in Bristol Bay, since there's not too many jobs, we have seasonal commercial salmon fishing. So this proposed Pebble mine is a threat in the protection of one of Bristol Bay tribal members' main staples, which is all salmon species. And they are born, in the freshwater shed areas. And in this Pebble mine is our concern is in the Iliamna Lake communities, which extends to our Bristol Bay oceans. So there's 2 main rivers that connect to the Bristol Bay oceans. One is on the Wood-Tiktik State Park, the site near Dillingham, the Wood River, which connects out to Nushagak Bay. And then the freshwater rivers that connect as well to the Nushagak Bay is the Nushagak Mulchatna rivers. They flow to the Nushagak Bay. And on the Iliamna side, where the proposed Pebble mine is, they have a big river at the end of the, I think it's a 70-mile lake, end of the Iliamna Lake down, there's Ikiagik down there, and then the Kwijak River flows out to the Kwijak Naknik Bay marine waters. So in both of these areas, this is threatening the juvenile salmon smolt habitat areas. So every spring, after the ice melts in the lake and the rivers open, we have these juvenile smolts. They start their out migration from the freshwater habitats into the ocean waters edge. So it's like as human beings, we have to have a transition period when we're not used to something, when we're little. It's the same with the little fish. Maybe for 1 or 2 weeks, when they're small and they want to start getting used to being out in the ocean waters, they go to the edge and go out a little bit more till they get acclimated to the colder ocean waters. Then they go back up into the freshwater system. And then, somehow these little animals or fish, they seem to know when they're ready to go live in the ocean. And they have what they call juvenile salmons, 1 year or 2-year-olds. So that's what that terminology come from. So after 3 years in the ocean environment, those salmon, adult salmon, they go back up to the rivers, the creeks, the streams, into the freshwater lake systems to where they were born, where the old salmon spawned them out. Now they're ready to go up there and go spawn out. So they work their way up through those currents. And as they're going up towards spawns, they have predators. Their predators, of course, is bears and us people that like to eat them, Yeah, so anyway, then they lay their eggs in the streams and creek beds. Then this cycle of life starts all over with new birth and new life. So, with this climate change, we have one of the concerns is we never used to have heavy rains. Like now we have, like the lower 48, we got these heavy early spring rains. And sometimes we have late fall rainfalls in these streams and creeks where they lay the salmon eggs, they become 2 to 4 feet wide, And of course, if that rain keep falling, you're going to have, the current's going to get real strong, current flow downstream, and it's going to affect the salmon eggs that were laid, even the young babies, juvenile salmon. So these other rivers that connect from Iliamna mine is the Dalerak and Kochtli creeks. And there's heavy, our tribes are worried that the heavy current flowing from the proposed Pebble mine, one of the concerns is, the toxic tailings. If something broke there, all that stuff could destroy everything in the fragile Arctic habitats where the fish are, where we got ducks, waterfowl, swans, all the birds that migrate up in the spring and live there, as well as the forage food that the large land animals eat. And of course, the main large land animals that we eat are the moose and caribou. And the fur-bearing animals that some people do trap and eat is the beaver, those fox, wolverines, and otters and stuff like that. Next slide, please.
Helen, I just want to remind you that we're going to need to wrap up in 15 minutes, and we want to leave a few minutes for questions.
I'll be done pretty soon. I know I am.
Okay.
Okay, so I mentioned earlier that we tribal baseline studies are very important because they document the native knowledge. And like I mentioned, the best approach that seems to work in the simple layman's language is the integrated tech and Western science marine mammal baseline type of research. And it can be tribally initiated or from your, regional marine mammal organizations. Next slide. So you can see these are the streams that I'm talking about the mine. They need more baseline to, even if our people know they need to do some kind of studies initiated by the tribes to document these, and so that those people will know that look at all these little streams connecting to. Those are all the different places where fish and all these animals live. Next slide, please. So with the seasonal yellowfin trawl fishery, some of the tribes, they're concerned that the marine mammal species born, for example, in Togiak Bay, some of them think they moved from Togiak to the Cape Pierce area. So we need to start conducting gathering studies of traditional knowledge on Togiak Bay. Next slide. I guess we recommend what we'd like to do on the Pebble mine issues. I would recommend the Iliamna Sub-Regional Tribal Councils develop their own integrated research so they can best manage their tribal resources as possible. Tribal stewards of their traditional multi-species resources into the future. And, if they could establish their own tribal marine multi-species conservation plan through funding with the components is tribal mission, strategic mission statement, goals, objectives, issues, and concerns, including land, water,